Recording going. All right. Well, welcome. Thanks everyone for joining us for session 3 of the Catalyzing Growth, the Path to Product Market Fit. For those of you that are joining us for the first time in this series, and that I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Cameron Law. I serve as the Executive Director of the Carlson Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Sacramento State. And we're excited to partner with Tech Futures Group through the Accelerate California Hub to bring this 4-part series. You missed the first 2, we will be following up with a recording, so we'll get you caught up on all of that content, but we're excited to have you here for session 3, all about go-to-market strategy and execution. And you'll be in great hands here with Steve and Nils, who will be diving into the content today. But without further ado, I'll pass it over to Steve, who will be guiding us through the process here. Feel free to use the chat feature. We'd love to have you throw in any questions or things that you're struggling with around go-to-market strategy and execution. So we'd love to hear from you, and your questions and elements always make for a more lively discussion, so we can make it more relevant for you. So please do pose your questions and all the things in the chat. So without further ado, take it away, Steve, and thanks all for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Cameron. Let me follow on with what Cameron said. We didn't prepare a formal poll. But as I'm digging into this, if each of you would just kind of put in the chat for today, are you doing B2B, B2C, or something, or some blend or something different? And maybe Cameron and Nils can kind of keep an eye on the total, and in a couple of pages we'll do a check. Partially out of interest and partially there's a lot of content, and if the whole world were B2C, I would shift gears a little bit. And if the whole world were B2B, then this will fit well, and we'll see where we go from there. Something in the air. Okay, so session 3, as Cameron mentioned. Get to the right screen here. Go to market. We'll do some quick introductions, but then I'm going to go into some frameworks and try to give you more, content that's actually like immediately usable. Some parting thoughts on this, because this is my last session. I'll participate on Thursday, but Paul Bazzo will be taking the team through investment readiness, and so I want to make sure you're ready to accept everything he's got. And then we will have, I hope, some discussion and Q&A at the end. You know me by now. I won't spend any more time here. I think the key point is lots and lots of B2B SaaS, which I will talk about more in just a moment. Nils, a few words on yourself, please.
Yeah, so hi, everybody. So my background is in enterprise software product management, and a big part of what I see of the role of product management is go-to-market, meaning who are we selling to, what are we telling them, why is our solution better than others, how do we make use of all the information and knowledge that the product organization creates and generates to make sure sales and marketing can successfully get prospects into the pipeline and sell them, whether that's B2B or B2C.
Right, and the eagle eye will figure out where Nils and I met if you look at the last 2 slides. Okay, so third session. We've done discovery and validation. I've spent a lot of my career there. Last time I added it up, I've done somewhere around 10,000 customer interviews, right? So I felt pretty good about that. Product development and positioning, I had good help, and I've spent lots of time around that. Go-to-market strategy execution presents a unique challenge for me in this format, because this is probably 85% of my last 3 decades of my professional life. So I'm trying to download 30 years of learnings and experience in the next 60 minutes. So I will do my best. Cameron, I'm counting on you that if you see people rolling on the floor and begging for mercy, you're gonna give me the hook, and we're gonna move on. We'll do it the same way, about an hour's presentation, panel discussion, AMA, and then next week, as I mentioned, commercialization and venture readiness. And please jump in. Last week was a weird week in many, many ways. But use the chat, break into the conversation. Nils will be doing color commentary as we go along, but feel free to jump in as well. Just a reminder, right? You get your GTM right in your pitch deck, and you get given the investment that gives you a chance to succeed. If you've already gotten the investment, congratulations. Now you got to go win. And so we'll be flipping back and forth today between kind of the pre-funding event and the post-funding event. But this is really, once you get the money to prove that you can take a startup to market, you're in the top 1 out of 1,000 already. And now you get the chance to prove you're in the top, 1 out of 5,000 or so that actually, make it to the moon. What is it? So really simply, you can Google or GPT or get any definition you want, but I think in the simplest terms, how you're going to get your product into the hands of customers who will pay you for it. It is absolutely critical for investment readiness. It is amazing to me how often this is not thought about. Like literally, oh, we'll hire some salespeople. Oh, wow, that's differentiated. Yeah, we've got the plan, and then you look at the financials, and the numbers don't tie out at all. And some of you may remember I've been a chief marketing person, I've been a chief financial person. I wear both those hats, and it just, my eyes cross when there's a simple equation that we'll talk about shortly, but should be common sense. The number of customers times the amount they pay you should equal your revenue. And often in pitch decks, they don't. Simple acid test to figure out if you know what you're doing or not. So let's start with some frameworks. And as with every topic in this series, there are, libraries worth and college degrees worth of different ways to approach this. So what I tried to do in today's deck is just bring a couple of different ones together. Not that one's better than another. It's just different ways of thinking about it, depending on your personality, your approach, your stage of your business. One may resonate more than another. Mix and match, whatever you like. But hopefully just giving you different useful and constructive ways to think about go-to-market. So first, I've shown you this ladder 3 times now, just because I think it's a good, it's a fairly detailed version of a very common theme. We've done a lot of the bottom of the ladder by now. And so since all of you have done, multiple product iterations and defined an MVP in the last 5 days, we can now step up, and we're looking at market entry and scale. And first and foremost, that's about paying customers. Okay, can you get people to pay you? It's a higher bar than that. As one of my CEOs once said, any bozo can sell 10 of anything. And there's some truth to that. The real question as you're in go-to-market is, can you sell 25? Can you sell 50? Can you sell 100? LTV, for those who don't know, is lifetime value. So meaning average lifetime value of a customer. CAC is customer acquisition cost. Your go-to-market has to consider these, and we'll talk a lot about channels today. Are you proving that this is a business and not just a product, right? And a business means that you're adding features and functions. You are expanding into adjacent markets. You're not a one-trick pony. And the goal here, whether you're proving that you're going to be able to or proving that you can, is you're using network effects to get rapid growth. Okay. So, in the last 3 sessions, by the time we finish this session, we will have started a customer need and gotten all the way to rapid growth and covered almost everything in between. Okay. So already done. We've done our customer validation work. All these topics very well by now. We've done all our product launch and minimum viable product work. And all these topics by well as well. And the purchase process and duration is kind of the link between these. Who's going to buy and how are they going to buy? Because that becomes critical in your go-to-market. And what's our goal? I've shown you this one a couple of times as well, but just to refresh. Okay, first off, value and pricing. Okay, I mentioned last week, or yeah, it was last week. Pricing is where your strategy meets the real world. One day, Cameron's going to let me do an entire session on pricing, but we're going to give it very short shrift today, I'm afraid. We'll touch on it, but a few words last week and a few words in some schedule, some session TBD. Channels and partners, okay, and your pricing determines your channels and partners. I cannot emphasize this strongly enough. You cannot sell, I'll show you the math, but you can't sell a cheap product directly. You can't sell an expensive product on self-service. You really have to get dialed in right, and that means different economics, different customer acquisition costs, different operating models, all of it. And they all have to tie together. You're going to hear me say that about 300 times today. The combination of your channel and your go-to market and your minimum viable product are going to create that competitive moat for you. You've got to make sure you have the resources for execution, both prospectively and as you move along. Talk about what those need to look like. Inevitably, there are going to be speed bumps and changes and competitive issues and customer issues and market issues that you don't anticipate or understand in advance. So prepare for those, because remember the goal here, referencing Peter Thiel, rapid growth, revenue customers. So you've got your monopoly-like market position. Okay. So and remember that monopoly-like market position gives you favorable economics. It gives you a defense against competitors coming up your tailpipe, and it gives you many more resources to deal with the inevitable slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, right? You've got longevity and resiliency built in if you've got that monopoly-like market position. And, how do you know you have it? Once again, you kind of know it when you see it, but if your customers care about your success as much as you do, that's a really good indication. Here's another another framework I really like. Aligning the Dots, a book I recommend highly. My friend Philippe, full disclosure, he is a friend, and if you all go buy a copy, you all tell him that you bought it because of me, he might buy me a bottle of wine. So I've got a significant personal incentive here. But highly recommended, easy to digest, and just to make clear on what they are, because this is really where 4 alignments is kind of where all your prep meets your go-to-market. Claim versus pain, right? You can read the words, you can read the book, but this is really what we've been talking about in terms of making sure that your solution and your fits the problem, and that it's a medicine, not an aspirin. You're treating a disease, not a symptom. Secondly, message and perception. This is about positioning, both and how you're going to communicate with your customers, with your partners, and fundamentally with your competitors, which is usually done through the interface of other participants in the market, analysts and media and so on. Purchase and sale, right? It is so hard to sell software. It is so difficult. It is very easy to have software purchased from you. This is what self-service and product-led growth is all about. That's the epitome of it. But even if you're in a position where you have to be doing direct sales, you want them buying from you rather than you selling to them. And this is true when you're selling your solution, and this is true when you're selling your company. Great company, companies can be sold. The fact that they can't be sold, I'm here to tell you, is not true. But they get sold they get sold much more easily and at much higher prices when they are purchased rather than sold as an exit. And then delight versus offering. We're not going to talk a lot more about this, other than this is part of your go-to-market. The first one is certainly MVP. The second one is go-to-market. Third is go-to-market. And this one is a combination of the two. This is critical to making sure that your customers care about you as much as you do. They have to be delighted. That bar changes over time, obviously. You tell them this is a V1, they're thrilled just to be part of it. You tell them this is production quality commercial release, it better be a lot better than the V1. And you got to be thinking about the whole customer experience here. It's not just does the software work as advertised. What's your relationship with them? How's their support work? How are your contracts? How are your interactions? How are your communications? That's all in customer delight. Those are all, I don't know, qualitative. I always lose track if that's left brain or right brain, but whichever piece of the brain that is, that's the squishy emotional piece. You'd be disappointed if I didn't go to the other side of the brain, which I'll do as soon as I have the mouse in the right place. Okay. Let's look at an ARR growth template. ARR, I hope you all know, is annual recurring revenue. Right now, it is the key way that SaaS companies are measured, and specifically ARR growth. If you're in a consumer business, people might be talking about monthly recurring revenue to you. It is analogous. It is not as simple as simply multiplying by 12. That would be a mathematical error, the way these things work. But you can, that's an exercise for the interested reader. And we can talk more if someone's in an MRR business. This is the template for the ARR growth forecast for especially a B2B SaaS company. It is one version of what won't happen. Okay, everybody knows that. Your investors know that. Every successful company know that. I'd be surprised if we could find a SaaS company that has grown exactly like this. But what this shows is that you understand what it takes to get to escape velocity. And I would really recommend in your financial forecast that you do not show 1, 3, 9, 25, 50, and 100, because everyone will know you just came to my webinar and you copied it and wrote it down, right? But you want to be kind of in those zones, to repeat myself, in a way that your customer acquisition, your number of logos, and your pricing all tie out about there. Your first year should be more than 0. A good first 12 months is 400, 600, 800 is great, 200 is okay. But boy, in that second year after launch, you've got to be nailing 1 million or more. And you see where the 3 triples and 2 doubles come from. In that first year after commercial launch, you should be growing 15 to 30% a month. Then you go at 300% a year and 200% a year. Now, are there successful companies who don't grow this fast? Yes, absolutely, 100%. Right? There are some that grow faster. But what your investors are looking for is, do you understand this is what de-risks the revenue forecast for them? Convince them that you understand this and that you know how to do it, and that there's a reasonable chance that you can do it. And now people aren't picking on your year 5 revenue forecast. Is there latitude? Of course there is. This is just a template. Build off it in a way that makes sense of your business. But recognize that if you're saying, oh, we're going to go 1, 2, 5, 10, no one's going to be interested. And if you're saying you're going 1, 10, 30, 50, 500, everyone knows you have no idea what you're talking about. Don't promise something that's never been done before. Revenue growth faster than Twitter is illegal. Operating income greater than Google's is illegal. Just means you haven't done your homework. Where did that hit? And yeah, and so I just added the asterisks down here, right? The point of my last minute-long rant is your mileage will vary. Okay, you don't have to use this, as it says, as a template rather than as something that's carved in stone. But understand the principles underneath it is really the key message here. And that applies. So here's your same revenue curve. Once again, template, not gospel. But now let's add operating income onto it. We had a question, or at least discussion on Thursday, about how your profitability needs change over time. Well, if you're on a growth path, it's okay. Everybody expects you to be losing at least 100% of revenue in your early years. By definition, pre-revenue, you're losing an infinite amount of revenue. Okay, that's fine. The issue is your go-to-market plan has to demonstrate that you are getting increasing returns to scale as you grow. And so as you look at that operating income margin down at the bottom, again, a template, not a roadmap. You're improving with scale. And by the time you're at 50 million-ish, you really ought to be able to do cash flow break even if you're on a normative growth path. Okay. There's always 6 months, a year, you can flex on this. Just don't have your plan being in the fourth quarter of the last year, a miracle occurs, gets you on track, because that kind of never works. The other thing that's really critical here, because growth rates do vary, is keep your eye on, all models are wrong, but some are useful. This is intended to be one of the wrong useful models. Keep your eye on the rule of 40. I've got a little bit more about it later in the deck. Go look it up. Essentially, it's a very simple calculation that takes your growth rate in percent. So let's say that's 100%. And your operating income in percent, which will be negative, right? So we're going to add them together. If you're growing at 100% and your op inc is negative 60, add 100 to negative 60 and you get 40. Yay, you win. Okay. If your growth rate is 40 and you're losing 40% of revenue, your rule of 40 is 0, and now you are really, really, really in trouble. Someone somewhere, I'm sure, has done a theoretical assessment of why the rule of 40 is true. I will just tell you from experience, empirically, it's true and it's widely understood across the industry. And you need to be living with it and by it and keep your eye on it. And we'll talk a little bit more about it later. So some frameworks. Let's talk about some checklists. I'll go back to this growth template for just a moment. You'll see this a few times today, I'm afraid. If that's the whole measurement, a SaaS company comes to maturity in 6 to 8 to 10 years. Maybe there's a year 0 in here where no one's even pretending to do pilots or betas. All you're doing is you're still coding. You're still doing customer validation, and your investors know that. Fine, that's great. Maybe it takes you an extra year to go 100 million. That's great. Maybe you do it a year faster. That's great. Okay, all those things are true. But what we're really going to talk, certainly by year 5, 6, 7, probably by year 4, maybe even year 3, lots of unexpected things have happened, and hopefully you've learned from all those unexpected things. So the rest of today, we're really going to talk about this first kind of year 1, year 2, 3 in terms of go-to-market. Who knows what happens, 1,000 days from now, who knows what the world looks like. Look how things have changed in our last 1,000 days. And remember, you're going to start in almost all circumstances with founder-led sales, even if it's consumer. Right, you're going and finding the people or that you've met during the customer validation process that want to try whatever it is you're building and selling. Okay, and then this is going to be evolution. So we're really focused today on that transition between founder-led sales and call it, the end of year 3. I remember vaguely from academia, there's like the 7 P's of marketing or the 4 P's of marketing, some P's of marketing. I'm sure someone can look it up. Someone's maybe even old enough to remember it. This is not that list, but I was interested as I went through the go-to-market components that are important to me, how many of them came up as P's. So personas, we talked about that at length in both customer validation and product market or MVP, the purchase process, pricing, positioning, partners, value prop, the whole product. See, I had to go to the second word P's on a couple of these. And then profit and payback, right? And all of these are critical. We will address most of them today, but don't forget about any of them. And if you think there's something I'm missing, feel free. I'm not going to claim that this is 100% comprehensive, because the range of startup experience is nearly infinite. So in this context, kind of another framework for you. Here are the questions that we really want to answer in a go-to-market exercise, go-to-market strategy. You can read them, and we're going to go through each of them. So rather than reading them to you, let's just go. So who benefits? Certainly the users better benefit. If you go back some years now, there were a whole lot of enterprise software products that came out that were just great for the executives and the management and the auditors and the financial people and the lawyers and the regulatory people. And the users got absolutely no benefit from them. And you don't know any of those company names, and I can't remember them because they all failed. I'll go way back. The first company to really understand that and solve it was Siebel Systems, and that kind of led the charge out of SaaS companies into B2B software. Right? Siebel figured out how to give the users of its Salesforce automation system as much benefit, enough benefit to comply with usage, so that the executives and finance people could get what they wanted. Siebel ran into other trouble, got bought by Oracle, long story, but that's the genesis of the companies like Salesforce and HubSpot. I forget the other one we looked at last week, Zoho, and hundreds of others. This applies, and this goes out into supply chain and customer service and CRM and finance and on and on and on. Managers, executives, they better, because someone in that pool is probably the one writing the check if you're in B2B. Advertisers, right, which mostly applies to a B2C world, but increasingly applies in interesting ways in a B2B world. This is what software innovation is about. Go find a business model where someone else is actually getting a benefit. I don't know who it would be. If I did, maybe I'd be building that company. I'm not saying it's not out there. I just think, this is where innovation and creativity comes to play. And you'll see I put on every one of these slides and other, because that's where the business model innovation is going to be going on. Who's buying, who's using, who's benefiting, who's going to pay. Critical. Okay, go to market, right? If you're going to go to market, there has to be a market clearing price. This is the whole pricing discussion. Someone has to give you money, or you're somewhere between a hobby and a nonprofit. It might be the users, especially if you're in consumer business. It might not be. Advertisers, Google, Facebook, Twitter, you pick your social media stream. That's where the money comes from. They're paying money for access to you and me. You are the product. Think about that. Partners, maybe your partners are paying you, or you're paying your partners, or your customers are paying your partners. Money can flow in many different directions when you're in your partner ecosystem. If the money is coming from corporate, big company X is writing you a check. Okay, now you really got complications. Is it coming from a P&L, a business unit? That business unit might be product oriented. It might be geographically oriented. It might be services oriented, right? There are lots of different flavors of these, but the key element there is whoever's in charge of that P&L is running a business just like you are. They're responsible for revenue, expenses, and some degree of profit at the end of the day. Could be a functional unit, supply chain, manufacturing, sales. The difference I create here is this is a customer facing functional unit. Marketing, if you're in MarTech, you can go through the list of all the different functional units that a company has. And then there's the back office, the administrative units, where they don't typically have customer facing or customer responsibility, right? They're the infrastructure, but boy, do they buy software. Finance, legal, HR, regulatory, depending on the markets. And then once again, other, but boy, understand this in detail. And then I would add on here, it's not on the slide because they won't pay, but security, if you're in the corporate world, remember from last week, security is going to have to check off on whatever you're doing these days. Ultra sensitive. And I realized I should have added IT as an example, administrative union. They buy a whole lot of software too. Okay, next. What are they paying you for? Okay, this is not always as straightforward as you think it might be. There are a lot of different models. And the items on this page are not mutually exclusive. They could be, you can mix and match these in any number of ways. The obvious one is software. That's what SaaS is, right? Software as a service. A lot of companies are wearing that SaaS cloak that actually charge by the transaction, right? They're measuring clicks or views or eyeballs or purchase transactions or monitoring processes. A good chunk of SAP's SaaS business actually is is transactional based. If you look at their different revenue engines and pricing models, right? They're not charging by the seat or by the entity or by the month. They're charging by, how much inventory is being held. And that kind of gets you towards a consumption usage model as well. The easiest way I find to explain this is go back 5-7 years and look at your cell phone bill. Right, you were still being charged by how many minutes you were on the phone and how many gigabytes of data you were being used. Now, as far as I know, everybody has unlimited on both, or at least we're all paying for our kids to have unlimited on both. But that's a very clean consumption model. Outcomes pricing is making a comeback, which I assume will be as transitory and brief and unsuccessful as its prior combats, but I could be wrong. This is where you're promising your customer some kind of great outcome, and you will get paid based on how great that outcome is, either on the upside or the downside. If anyone's thinking seriously about this, please call me. Let's have a conversation. It hasn't historically been wildly successful. Of course, advertising, referrals, I've probably left 3 or 4 off. And as I've said before, amazing place to innovate and come up with something new and creative and different. And then once you've decided what they're buying, what they're paying for, how are they going to price it? And obviously there's lots of overlap here with the prior page. Sometimes pricing structures are identical with the pricing metric, and sometimes they're different. They overlap. But are you counting users? Are you counting events? Are you measuring results? Is it by the calendar? Is it something else? And then you get into, are you literally going to go around and count every single nose that's using your software? Noses on face, hands on keyboard, butts in seats. Are you doing it by tiers? You're going to count every 1,000, every 50,000? What is it? How are you going to think about functionality? You've all seen this in probably every consumer app that you use as kind of the good, better, best, also known as freemium. We could go on for ages here. And there's lots of room right now to innovate in pricing models, and there's lots of innovation going on. There's some really interesting experiments being run that you could look up, or we could talk about another day. On pricing, and I'm limiting myself to this, and then we'll move on until we schedule a pricing webinar. Do your best to make sure that your pricing unit is tied to the customer's unit of value. I will give you an example I'm working on. I might have mentioned it last week. I'm working with a startup that is using AI to do vegetation mapping for environmental and ecological consulting. Drone footage, AI does all kinds of cool things. That's all you need to know about them. Everyone else in that space to date charges their customers, the environmental consultants, by either megabytes of data used, megapixels captured in the images, or compute cycles. Imagine that you're an environmental consultant and what you know is 10,000 species of plants, and you spend your days out in the salt marsh identifying plants. Are megapixels and megabytes and compute cycles the way you think? Not really. They want to be charged by the acre. It's how they charge their clients. It's how they measure their business. It's how they calculate their revenue and their profitability. Great. So let's charge by the acre. Okay, figure out what that is for your customers. What's their equivalent of acres, and tie your stuff to that as closely as you can. That's one dimension of pricing. In almost all markets, there are at least two dimensions of pricing. One is complexity. So to use my prior example, complexity might be, are we doing 10-meter resolution, 1-meter resolution, half-meter resolution, or 5-centimeter resolution? Okay. Payroll is a business every single one of us knows. Okay. Complexity is measured by how many different jurisdictions you're in, how many withholdings there are from paychecks, how large the paychecks are. There are different regulations. If a single paycheck is actually more than 7 figures, causes problems for all the pro athletes. You can think of many others. And then the other scale, of course, is the other dimension is how big, how many acres, how many employees. Apply that to your own business. You want at least those two so that you can map. If you think about customers come in small, medium, and big, and simple and complex, now you have a pricing model that fits all 6 of those. Okay. You don't have to deploy that from the get-go. You can deploy a very simple pricing model when you start, and you probably will because you're going to be focused on one area. But have that model in mind so that as customers from outside that bullseye come to you, you can meet their needs and stay in business. Because your pricing model will change over time. You should be testing and experimenting. Pro tip, build price increases into your terms and license agreements. All the big successful SaaS companies do it. Sophisticated customers expect it. And it's not nearly as hard to raise prices as you think it is. A, no one notices or cares, by and large. And B, everybody expects it. So build it in. And as you add more functionality, build more in. It is actually fairly easy to raise prices as long as you don't just rip something that people love out from underneath them or charge 10x more for it. It's really not that hard. Okay, here with ends the sermon on pricing for today. Customer acquisition, right? These are the tools that you use to get to market. Again, we'll probably have started with founder-led growth. Who do you know? Who can you get to? How do you make the sale? But remember, in that time period of founder-led growth, what you're looking for is what's the repeatable sales motion such that it doesn't have to be the founder. Okay, you do the first 3, let someone else try the next 3, and you just come in if they don't go well and kind of close them at the end, and then try to be completely hands-off the next 3 and see if someone else can get them through to fruition, right? And that's not a VP of sales or a CRO, by the way, and we'll get to that in a minute. That's someone else that's already on your team. These are all the different ways to get people's attention once you're into that repeatable and scalable model. There are more. MarTech, marketing programs. This is probably the most dynamic piece of the software industry, and year in, year out. Right now we've got a whole lot going on, of course, with AI products, and we'll get to that. But by a year from now, most of the innovation is going to be happening here again. You cannot possibly do all of these at once, and you shouldn't. But what you do need to do is figure out, given your product, your target market, how they buy, the personas you're going after, everything we've been talking about for the last 5 hours of airtime, which ones are right for you, and focus on those. And I would tell you, as I mentioned, founder-led sales to start. Start with small financial commitments. And it's crazy. I've seen startups without a single customer agree to one of these insane, pay us $50,000 and we'll put you in front of 20 good prospects. That's just $50,000 in 2 weeks out of your life that yielded nothing. Start small, figure out what works, build from there. Test constantly. I kind of said this on the other page, but this is A/B testing with your pricing, with your website, with your digital advertising, with everything else you can think about. And the tools are out there now, not to just do A/B, but do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. I mean, how far out the alphabet can you go? Monitor them and try new things. It's not just A/B. It's like, wow, we've never tried this before. Let's try it. These are low cost things that can have tremendous impact. So, that's what the innovation experiments is about. Look for that high ROI and fastest impact. And I would say part of that is be super careful about essentially anything I put on the prior page. When email marketing started back around the same time, flush toilets were invented. What do we get, Niels? 6-8% open rate, 10% open rate. It was really remarkable what you could get, and the yield off that was amazing. That's dropped by 2 orders of magnitude. It's almost a total waste of time to do email marketing. Not quite, but almost. Okay, so you could still be in a market where that matters, but I would be super careful about it. So my theme here, and then Nils, I'm going to put you on the spot and just see if you got anything to add. These are common starting points. These last 2 pages. Look what makes sense. Adapt from here, and if you do all of them, you're doing something wrong, because then you're just spreading the peanut butter too thin. Do the ones that are the most impactful. Again, as a starting point, over time, marketing spend is about 8 to 12% of your total operating expense. Okay, that's not being measured as percent of revenue. It's being measured as total part of your OpEx. So you'll figure out how to do the spreadsheet. You may be in a business where it should be 30. You may be in a business where it should be 4. Can't tell you in advance, but this is a good place to start and build out from there. And again, as a general rule of thumb, with variation all over the place, your marketing program spend is going to be about half of your total marketing spend. One caveat here: don't play silly games where you say, well, if it's outside my 4 walls, it's a program. If you're paying PR people to do PR, that's people. It's not programs, right? If your PR people are running a digital campaign for you, great. That's programs, not people. Just get them to split that part of the budget up, so you know where you are in the dashboard. Okay, I'm going to stop there on customer acquisition. And Nils, any comments? And then audience, any questions or comments from you as well?
I think that was very complete, Stephen. I would just say, you put a lot of different ideas up there and things like that. The key things are still the key. You need to understand your customer, where they are, how they talk, what they're going to respond to, the problems that they have, and how they're going to get solutions to that from your solutions. So, don't let the trees distract from the forest. Would probably be my biggest message there. And that goes back again to what you said. Start simple, right? Make sure you can communicate to the first target audience what they're getting. Make sure you understand their problem. You talk to them in their terms. That's going to get you a long way compared to where lots of companies start, which is, oh, I'm going to sell this to everybody. Everybody needs it, which ain't going to work.
I'll give you another metaphor. Everything in the last 2 pages is the list of items at the buffet. If you eat all of them, you're going to feel terrible. Pick the right mix of healthy and tasty, and let all the rest go by. Okay, Cameron, anything in the feed we should address?
There was one question here. What do you mean by marketing program dollars? Is that development of the software?
Marketing program dollars are typically going to be, simple examples are how much you spend on digital AdWords, affinity marketing. If you're going to go to a conference, your conference fees are program dollars. Paid placement, paid speaking slots, what you spend on your website, anything that's marketing generated or marketing focused that cannot be tied to a specific human being spending time.
How much you spend on postage and printing for your postcard campaign, which we don't do anymore, of course, but
which no one's seen in a decade, but right, that would be an example. Okay, did we get does that answer the question?
Hey, Stephen, back to your original question, your poll question at the beginning. It's a very big mix, really a mix of B2B and B2C, and B2B to C, and many combinations of those three letters / digits.
Good. Okay. Perfect timing. Thank you for that. We will get to that in half a second. Okay. I've mentioned a couple of times that there's lots of innovation going on. I would argue to you that what I've shared with you in the last half hour is maybe not 100% comprehensive, but it's reasonably speaking state of the art as of, let's say the end of the summer. AI, it's one of these phenomenal platform changes that come around every decade or so. You're going to hear a lot of hot takes that this time it's different. Of course, it's different because it's different technology, but thematically, this is the same. We saw this in 10 years ago, and 20 years ago, and 30 years ago, and 40 years ago. That just one was, client server to the internet to SaaS, internet to mobility, and now we have AI. So it's affecting everything, right? Product solutions, pricing, customer success, marketing, you name it. It is going on. And you ought to be looking at how you can use AI, which may be LLMs, and it may be purpose-built AI, and you track it better than I do for your business. But it is the single greatest opportunity in at least a decade, when we had the mobility revolution, and 20 years ago the SaaS revolution, and 30 years ago the client server revolution. This is when iconic companies are formed. Right? I'm very aware that in the last 3 sessions, I've spent a lot of time telling you guys how hard this is going to be and how hard it is. Well, here's the upside. This is the best time in the last decade. Okay, this is when the great companies of the future of the next 20 years are formed. So, if you've got one, jump on it. And the VCs are aware of this, and I've said before that VCs to some extent heard. And they get thematic, but I've had at least 3, maybe 4 different people say to me, the quote on the bottom, right? The only question that matters for any of you is what's the AI strategy? That is not, do not read that specifically as a strategy about what's their AI-based product. That is one of many possible answers to this question. But if you're not using AI to build a great company, then there's really not a lot of purpose in talking with you. At the very least, you got to be doing AI in the back end with customer targeting and analysis and so on. But think through this, and there doesn't have to be one answer. You could have 6 answers to how you're using AI in your startup, but use it. Okay, so let's go back to these components real quickly. So personas, product, value prop, positioning. We've covered all those in customer validation, in MVP. We touched on pricing. So what's left? Go to market, just grammatically, implies motion. You're going somewhere. You're going to the market. Well, we've kind of laid out who's going and what's going. How are you getting there? Are you getting there in a horse and carriage, or a high-speed train, or teleporting? I mean, what are we doing here? And that's what sales channels are all about. Okay. The language at Dell used to be, what's the market motion? How are you getting from here to there? And that's conceptually, digitally, physically, right? How do you get what you're selling into their hands or on their keyboards? And it defines the economics of your business, right? How fast are you going to grow? What's your revenue level going to be? How fast are you going to grow? What's your margin going to look like? And the key that I think we haven't spoken about yet in these webinars this season is capital efficiency. Especially for SaaS companies, capital efficiency is king. We will talk about that. So interesting. I'm glad, Nils, that you pointed out we've got B2B to C, because that's going to matter here too. I did not do a slide on that, but we can talk about it. So B2B channels. Fundamentally, you've got direct and indirect. Indirect, not a lot of people know about this anymore, but OEMs have been around for a long time. So this means you're handing over your entire go-to-market operation to someone else. Splunk and Box and VMware do this. And some other company is providing a service, selling a software bundle, selling hardware in which your stuff is included. This is great. Big companies get built here. And again, this is the other comment I wanted to make. These are also not non-exclusive. You can do multiple of these. I'd suggest starting with one, but if you think about many big SaaS companies, they cover several of these. Okay, cloud marketplaces, right? This is the B2B marketplace. Snowflake, Atlassian, Elastic, right? They're all sitting out there on AWS, and click the box and download it. VARs hasn't been popular much in recent years. We used to work with value-added resellers all the time. These typically are smallish companies, anywhere from a couple of people to a couple of dozen people, who are specialists in implementing and supporting some particular B2B application. If you've implemented Salesforce or HubSpot recently, it probably came with a services package that included a couple of people that came and interviewed you and helped implement and fine tune and train and so on. MSPs, managed service providers, so they can run your SolarWinds or your Meraki for you. Those are the major indirects. Direct, there's self-service. You'll note in particular companies like Salesforce and HubSpot do both VARs and self-service and product-led growth. It is frighteningly easy to go onto the admin panel at Salesforce and spend another $10,000 a year without even breathing hard. It's a great model. Inside sales, right? This was a cleaner distinction pre-COVID, but it's still worth making. Inside sales are typically people who work at their desk. They do Zoom calls or phone calls. They very rarely actually go anywhere, as opposed to field sales, who are the guys who, at least in the old days and increasingly again, get on airplanes, drive places. They go to tall buildings. Some of them even put on suits and ties anymore, depending where they're visiting, and they do handshakes, right? And then there's kind of the hybrid of systems integrators. The reason these aren't an indirect channel is the systems integrators almost never take title to your software. What that is a partnership where you deliver the software and the operations and the technical support, and they deliver the implementation, training, ongoing customer experience, customer success. I'm not going to talk a lot more about systems integrators because typically there are a few exceptions. Workday having been one of them. But typically you've got to be a pretty big, pretty successful software company before the systems integrators will give you the time of day. Nils and I spent 2 years trying to get the attention of one of the companies. Nothing until the day we showed up with a 10 million euro software order with 3 million euros of consulting business for them. And then they agreed to take the meeting. But that was kind of what it took. B2C, they're analogous. The app stores we all know and love, your own website, of course. And then there are different versions of partnership and pre-installation. And probably every single person on this call has bought something on every one of these, except maybe those of us who aren't gamers have not been in the digital distribution world. B2B2C, marry these two together. You're going to go to some other business who is then going to sell to the consumer. How's that going to work? There's also, it's much smaller and paid less attention to, but B2B2G, which is business to business to government. And you'll find those. Okay. Let's marry your channel and your product. If it's a component, right? If it can't stand alone for whatever reason, you're almost certainly going OEM. Unless what you need is additional services, in which case you'll be going to VARs or systems integrators or your own services. If it's self-services, marketplaces, whether the consumer or business, and of course, product-led growth. If you have to wrap services around it, please try to find someone else who will do that for you after you get past the very early stages. You do not want professional services revenue on your books. Give that to someone else whose business that is, a VAR, a consulting firm, a systems integrator. It's even not the main point of today, but a brief digression. There's an argument around if you have to do professional services early on to be successful, don't even ask for revenue, right? Just accept it as a very high entry-level cost of goods that you're going to get rid of as quickly as you can. It pollutes your gross margins. It's a skill set that you don't have. It pollutes your growth rate. Investors hate it. Try not to do it, which is a big change from, call it 10 or 20 years ago. And if you hit $1 billion in sales, then all bets are off and you can do something else. So come back and talk to me when you hit $1 billion in ARR, and we can have a different conversation. But until then, avoid it. If you need evangelism, meaning you're really going to have to go out and sell it, well, then you better be selling it, because the VARs aren't going to be interested, and the systems integrators aren't going to be interested until you're at scale. So it's going to be inside or field. And if you got to wrap services and evangelism, well, now you've got direct sales, either inside or field, and the systems integrators. And the asterisk there is to remind you that's going to be really, really hard early on. I wouldn't recommend it. This didn't come out as the build I wanted to, sorry. This is supposed to build from left to right, so I'll just talk to it from left to right. So you've got the channels along the left. Partially the top is goodness and the bottom is badness, but that's not really completely the way to look at this. Your go-to-market costs are the least expensive on the top, obviously with an OEM, because someone else is paying for all of them, and most expensive as you roll down through VARs and inside and field sales. Your marketing costs may be very similar as you go from inside and field sales to big SIs, but your operating costs, your human costs, go up by multiples. Account control, OEM, you're not even going to know who your accounts are unless your partner tells you, because you have to support them in some fashion. Field sales, you've got total account control, and as you get to the big systems integrators, it's split. Often they'll take control from you, but as I said, that's a ways off. Your sales cycle goes from short, marketplaces and product-led growth. I mean, we have all gone to some marketplace. We have made a decision, clicked, purchased, sold, gone in minutes, possibly seconds. Hey, Eric, I'll introduce you in a few minutes. As you go down the spectrum, right, inside sales typically take, call it less than a quarter, ideally, and field sales can be a year or more, right? And this will become very important economically. And those three are then the determinants of execution risk and investment risk, right? If some big company is carrying the water for you, your execution risk is very low and your investment risk is very low. If you are hiring a field sales force to go out on sales cycles that will take 6 to 12 months or longer, that's a tremendous execution risk. And as an investor, that's a somewhere between a bright orange and a red flag. I do know venture firms who no longer invest in companies that need sales forces. They just go, oh, if you need a sales force, we have no interest, right? So anything that they're only looking basically at marketplaces and PLG. It limits the number of companies they can look at, obviously, but it also limits the number of highly expensive flameouts that they're going to be exposed to. And so to tie that to the economics, okay, here's your average contract value, meaning just, what's your average customer going to pay you for your first sale, typically expressed as an annual value. And just some bands, right? And so, if you're much above 300K, you probably need help at this stage. But, everything up to about 300K is feasible for a startup to sell. And here's the length of your sales cycle. Okay, less than a month, 1 to 3 months, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 12 months. All right. Under 5K, less than a month. Okay, B2B, B2C, don't care. That can be product-led growth and self-service. Very easy for a VP or above to put that on a credit card. right? Even a director, senior director might be able to charge $1,000, $2,000, put on a credit card expense on throw. No procurement, no fuss, no muss. Okay. Get up here, 25 to 50K. Okay. Now you're selling. Okay. You need someone that's going to interact with your customer decision makers and influencers and authorizers. So either that's, a partner or it's someone who works for you sitting in their home office on Zoom. Okay. 25 to 50K. Okay. You get up, field sales, 6 to 12 months, you need to be selling at 100K or more average. Okay, can you take some 75K sales? Of course you can. If you can quickly convert them to hundreds, or you have a countervailing number of 125s. But average out at kind of the 100K range. And I would tell you that even that's a bit low. This, you may note, leaves you some interesting white spaces on the grid. Oh, and if you go above 300, as I mentioned, get some help. Because the risk of selling that is that you fail. What do you do in the 5 to 25K range? VARs won't touch it, and you can't make money on it with inside sales. Okay, this is a pricing problem. It's a channel problem. It's a whole product problem. You got to figure something out. Can you start there? Sure, of course you can. In that year zero, where we said you have to have some revenue. Fine if you're experimenting in this domain, but recognize that you got to be moving down to the left or up to the right very quickly. And the same thing here in the 50 to 100K range. Yeah, you can cheat a little bit, 70, 75, 80, 85, sure. 60K, 70K, if your inside sales team is really good, maybe they can cover it. Maybe between cheating up from inside and cheating down from the field, you can cover it. But it's kind of a death zone economically. If you're using that for field sales, you will go broke. And it will always take more than 3 to 6 months. And the reason is that your customer acquisition costs and your customer success costs, which includes COGS, are out of sync with your lifetime customer value of each account, right? And so these are kind of the death zones, and the sophisticated investor will look at that and say, ooh, you're going to do field sales and you think your average first deal is 60K? Yeah, thanks. We're going to pass on that one. Okay, so be attuned to those. Okay, that's a economic framework. So let's talk about what you need in order to pull it off. Any questions we should pause for, Cameron or Nils? Any commentary?
There was one going back to the professional services. Jane, did that question get answered, or do you want us to bring it back in? Go ahead, Jane.
Sorry about that. The channels time product slide. You were talking about, I think you said something about personal services.
Professional services.
Professional services, if it's involved. So if you're selling a software and let's say someone has to go out to utilize professional service as a part of the software, is that the problem? I didn't quite understand where you're going.
It's typically, so services come in 2 forms. There's break fix, right? Something's not working. I can't figure out how to get my password to work, yada, yada, right? This is customer support. AI is taking over most of that. Don't worry about that. That's in your cost of goods sold, right? You want to minimize that cost as much as you can, but that's just part of doing business. Then there's how to. How do I do this? Or implementation or training, right? Ideally, instrument as much of that out as your software as you possibly can, right? The goal we set for actually a founder many years ago, we told him his software was too complicated to install. And he looked at it and said, well, doesn't everyone just write SQL code? It's like, no, that's not actually how it happens. Well, what do you need? And we said with a little bit of tongue in cheek, they should be able to bang their head on the space bar and have it install. 6 months later, he has to come back to a meeting and he said, watch this. And he banged his head on the space bar and installed. Okay. That's okay. If you can get there, that's great. But let me introduce Eric Meyer briefly, who's joined us. we'll get to his details, but Eric and I were recently, involved in a company that took a lot of business change management inside the company, inside the customer, right? It was really changed to how they do business. Someone's got to deliver those services. And you, as a software company, you do not want to be the one to deliver those services. It is a financial pollution.
That's the art, at least from the world of B2B healthcare, is if you're going to institute quite a bit of change, you want to be mindful to keep the change management to a minimum. And I think you want to make those distinctions because that can happen. And if there's too much change management, chances are everyone from your champions to your users are going to introduce friction.
Yeah. So that's the downside. The upside is, let's take Salesforce or HubSpot or any of them, right? They have built a cottage industry of really successful consultants who go out and do all the implementation and training and discovery and validation and all the rest of it. And it shows up nowhere on Salesforce's income statement. It's a thing of beauty. Okay. Because at best, professional services give you 50% gross margin. Usually it's less than that. And at best, you can grow a professional business services sustainably, maybe 25% per year, 30% per year. Okay. So do the math versus software. You should be at 80, 85% gross margins, growing 100% a year. How you just made your job so much harder if you're mixing in professional services. Try not to.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, the chart that you showed with those two death zones in it, I have found that with other things, not SaaS, I haven't sold SaaS before, so this is a whole new world I'm jumping into with SaaS, but with non-SaaS, I found for those two areas, a nice buffer is the affiliate programs, really coming in and kicking those in with some incentives to make sure you kind of got that little buffer to help you through those. And that's what I've known with the non-SaaS, but I'd be interested with SaaS, how is that different and what have you found that can be kind of the things to buffer you up before you hit that next level?
I think affiliates are really interested, especially in B2C and especially in the lower dead zone here. I will defer to anyone else on the call, including Nils and Eric. I haven't seen any great solutions in the upper death zone. The way to get that done is bigger sales.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I would add, Leslie, your comment, every industry I've ever looked at has a death zone, at least one death zone. Okay, where they are varies, of course, by industry. But you can apply the same principle to the California wine industry as easily as you can apply it to software as a service, right? Every industry has one.
But Steve, you maybe, I'm assuming you agree, you may have to go through the death zone.
Yeah, you got to move
death zone.
Yep.
Death zone basically equals cash being burned. So just how do you do it as most expeditiously as possible?
Yep.
And then they're shifting around, especially like with climate change, everything could be going fine in this zone, but all of a sudden now you've got the entrance of climate change and you're watching the wine industry kind of moving to dessert wine only with climate change at the rate we're going. And then it's like, okay, how do you shift based on that, and watching, okay, it used to be here. We got to rethink this.
Yeah, remember what I said about the reason I'm not even going to try to talk about year 4 onward? Because just too much changes.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks.
So back to here, right? Again, focusing down here, founder-led sales, evolution. So what are you tracking in this zone? These are the basics, right? I think last time I checked, there's somewhere around 300 SaaS metrics being discussed and published and tracked and so on. Okay, no one should track 300 metrics. It's crazy. There are half a dozen every SaaS company should be tracking. My personal list is on this slide. Eric and Nils and anyone else can certainly jump on. And then every SaaS company should be tracking another handful, but it's going to vary on your business and your stage as to what those handfuls should be. So somewhere between 8 and 12 is the right number. Every company should have the same 6, and then every company is going to have 2 to 4 to 6 that are idiosyncratic to them. ARR, first and foremost. There are some businesses that really operate monthly, fine, monthly recurring revenue. I don't care. It's easiest when you go into a board meeting to have both on the slide, and then you don't have to wonder. You don't have to calculate it on the fly because someone will want the other one. You might as well know them both. Net dollar retention. One, if you don't know what this is, it's how much of your ARR do you get back in the renewal period from your existing customers. One version you may have heard outside of the SaaS world is when retail is talking about their results. This is exactly analogous to same-store sales. Did they get more or less money from the exact same set of stores? Okay, and your new logos don't apply to net dollar retention. Any healthy SaaS company, a healthy SaaS company has to have net dollar retention over no less than 90%. A growing, okay, you're on the right track, SaaS company is going to be over 100%. COGS we've talked about before, but my goodness, at least over the 80%, ideally over 85%. Get there as quick as you can. Rule of 40, we've talked about a little bit, but this is the revenue growth rate plus op inc greater than 40. Okay, and that has an implication we'll talk about in just a minute. And then magic number I haven't mentioned before, but this is your total spend on customer acquisition in the period that just ended, so month, year, quarter, year, whatever you're measuring, divided by your new revenue in this period. And whether you're using month or quarter or year depends on your channel and your sales cycle, right? You know, if you've got a 90-day sales cycle, don't bother looking at the month, look at the quarter. If you're in a consumer business, you might be doing this by week. And again, for theoretical reasons that I don't understand, I don't know if anyone's gone and looked at it, it really wants to be around 1. And the healthy bandwidth is 0.75 to 1.25. And it's not clear why it shouldn't be well under 1, but companies that go down to 0.5 don't do well unless they come back. Don't know why, but empirically that's what it is. So calibrate your spending to your new revenue acquisition. And then, as I said, whatever matters to your business. Interestingly, in my feed this morning, I have mentioned this Substack before, but here was the title: My Favorite Benchmarking Reports. Bookmark this for easy reference. Okay. These guys publish a survey of SaaS companies of all sizes and all the critical metrics every year, and it came out this morning. Merry Christmas. I recommend going. It's a great Substack. There are many others, but Gustafson does a really good job. I would go there. Okay, assets you need. And now I'm going to click through things fairly quickly here until we get to the end. We looked at all your customer acquisition. This is just the same slide put back in this part of the deck. Figure out which ones work for your business. Other GTM assets that you're going to need. Customer facing. How many different decks do you need? Quick detour. Every founder should have 3 decks. And every time you're working in PowerPoint or Google Slides, have all 3 of them open. I see Leslie nodding. I probably said this to you guys before. One deck is your pitch deck for investors. One deck is your sales deck for sales. One deck is your partnering deck for partners. They are different decks. Do not go into an investor with your sales deck and try to close a deal, get an investment, because it will fail. Okay. When you live this 24/7, anytime you're working on a slide, I'm sure it's a beautiful slide. It's a brilliant slide. Finish it. Then look at it and say, really, which deck does it belong in? Because at least 2/3 of the time, it doesn't belong in the deck that you currently have open. Switch it over. Right? It's just another thought that came in. Okay, end of digression. You can all read that. And then, there's kind of the infrastructure. So of course it starts with your solution, your customer offer. What's your product? What's your pricing? Do you have a beta offer? Do you have a pilot offer? What are your onboarding materials and processes? How are you going to do support? That's all just part of your whole product solution. I assume you have that. Sales targets. Okay, who are you going after, especially in this first era, founder-led, but then beyond that? And then what's your lead gen plan once you're past the people you know? And how are you going, once you've landed them, how are you going to expand them? Documents. Oh my God. I can't tell you how many companies say, we've got someone ready to sell. Do you have a, Steve, do you have a sales document we can use? People, get these ready. Okay, just in case you don't know, MNDA is a mutual non-disclosure agreement. If you're working with businesses, typically they're going to make you sign theirs, fine. Often they'll want you to have, sign their purchase order, their master subscription agreement. Just have your counsel look at it. It's worth the $150. Make sure there's nothing egregious. When humans go up against lawyers, humans don't usually win. Make sure your lawyer goes against their lawyer. The green ones are what I would consider to be the absolutely you cannot live without these, right? As soon as you're within 30 days of trying to close a sale, get these going. The other comment I'd make on under the documents piece is make these separate documents. Do not include your EULA and your purchase order in your master subscription agreement. Make them appendices. Okay, and keep your MSA as short as you can. Quick tip for product-led growth. Have your EULA online. And when someone goes to add 4 users or add functionality, it says by clicking this, you agree, you hereby agree to the terms of our EULA, which is here. We had one company where we did that, had it running for 2 years, probably generated $5 million worth of revenue. As far as we can tell, not one single person ever looked at the EULA. Don't present it to them because they'll read it. Don't hide it from them because that's illegal. But put the tiny little bit of friction of one click between them and the EULA, no one will ever look at it. And then pipeline management. You'll know when you need a CRM. You can manage a software company up to 3 million, maybe 5 million on a spreadsheet. If you're in B2B, if you're in B2C, different world. Salesforce and HubSpot will be happy to take 3 months of your life and $50,000 of your cash to set you up with a CRM system that is overbloated and overblown and pretty much useless. I recommend not doing that until you just can't survive without it. Field tested KPIs, some of these are the same. You should be tracking all of these. Make sure you're consistent, make sure you're real, and along with
Hey, Steve, did you mean to be sharing your screen?
Am I not?
No.
No, I can.
I see field
I can see the
tested
screen.
KPIs.
Eric, you're the
Oh,
one.
yeah. I see it.
All right, my bad.
He's a software pro, people. Trust me on this one. Okay, and don't promise results that haven't been delivered before, right? You need to know how companies in your space do along these metrics and plan your business accordingly. Okay, some parting thoughts. It's probably implicit, but let me make it explicit. On this road to product market fit and venture readiness, right, in the last hour, I've shown you at least half a dozen places where your go-to-market thing can just stumble and crush to its knees. What do? You go back to the product, you go back to customer validation, you figure out where you're wrong, you do it again. Iterate, 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 experiment, test, iterate. Nils, I toned this down, but what's your original quote in the bottom right? Because I stole this from you.
That doesn't actually sound much like me, but basically, you have to make sure that that you're selling something that people want, and you're telling them about it, and you're reaching the right people. I mean, that's the bottom line. You can't go to market with something that nobody wants.
I surprised him out of context and he's being nice. The original quote was, if your revenue is not growing, don't blame sales or marketing, blame product.
Oh yeah, well that's true. Yes.
Right.
If sales isn't making quota, it could be product's fault. And what that means is you haven't given them the right information, meaning they don't know how to talk to customers correctly. They don't know how to get the right customers into the funnel, stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there you go. Iterate. Resiliency and flexibility. I reuse this quote, right? Do you know the structure? Are your plans and models and assumptions consistent? Are they adaptable? One friend of mine who's been a very successful software entrepreneur says he tries to carve out half a day a week to just sit quietly, no phone, no email, no Slack, no text, and think about all the things that could go wrong and what he would do, from people to market to competition to financial to political to whatever. It served him very, very well. He's done okay. Pitfalls, don't get stubborn. This is the biggest thing. Be curious, not stubborn. Don't get married to your product. We know your baby's beautiful. That doesn't mean people will pay for it. People will only pay for a baby they think is beautiful. I mentioned before, make hypotheses, write them down, and be rigorous about going back and checking. Don't go in and listen to someone say, oh yeah, that's what we expected. Because then you're missing the customer point of view. And then those are kind of conceptual. Practically speaking, don't add expense too soon. Don't add a CRM too soon. Don't go to conferences too soon. Don't do a great big lead buy too soon. And I'll get to some thoughts on hiring in a minute. You got to be consistent. I mentioned this earlier, but your average selling price times your new logos plus your expansion minus your churn better equal your revenue. And the number of logos that you are bringing in better be rational. If you have to add 2 million customers to grow this year, that's not going to work. Right? And that average selling price has to fit the channel that fits how the customers want to buy from you. And then returns to scale. So that's a summary of things we've talked about already. Scaling. Stay lean until you're losing deals because you don't have enough people. Mark Leslie, the sales learning curve, I've mentioned it before. When the major reason you're losing deals is because you don't have the number of people to respond to them, you can go hire people as fast as HR can filter them through. Until then, your standard mantra should be, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough people. Until you have the data to prove that you don't have enough people, you have more than enough people. Prove it's effective before spending. That's on systems, that's on leads, that's on people, because capital efficiency is king. A SaaS company gets about 2 years and there's a range here, but about $3 to $4 million of capital consumed. And if they haven't reached liftoff by then, sell them to PE or wind them down, or run them as a lifestyle business, right? Because they're not getting another round. They're not reaching liftoff. There are mind-bogglingly few exceptions to this. Because VCs aren't ATMs, right? If you fall off the growth curve, you've got to cut your expenses. And on both those firms, okay, everybody wants to go hire a sales leader and a marketing leader. Be super cautious, people. These roles are crazy expensive, insanely expensive. To get a credentialed CRO, $350 to $450 a year, all in. Okay, and you won't know for a year and a half if he or she is any good. You might spend that for 2 years and get nothing out of it. That's a significant chunk of whatever capital you raised. And be really careful. Oh, this guy's done it before. She's done it before. No one's ever done what you've done before. You've got to discount that statement. Just because they've built a prior enterprise sales force doesn't mean that's what they are going to do for you. Seen this fail over and over. You, the founder, are the best person to figure it out. This is why founder-led growth is not just kind of a necessity. It's an advantage. You figure it out, then hire someone to scale it. And by the way, if you're hiring someone to scale it, that's a way cheaper human being than hiring someone to figure it out. Go-to-market team, you need people in sales and marketing and customer success. What you're looking there for is innovation, energy, enthusiasm, analytics. I will speak against myself, and this is illegal from hiring practices, so don't do it. But this is a young person's game. So you got to find someone who's at least young at heart and young in brain to experiment on your sales and marketing. Marketing people came and say, oh, I know this. I'll run this play and this play and this play. It's the same problem as above. It's not going to work. It's the email problem. 20 years ago, it was brilliantly successful. Now it's useless. Okay. Everything that was good 5 years ago it's on a way to uselessness. You got to figure out what's new. Because everything, the value erodes. So sum it up, and then we'll take questions and let Eric and Nils talk. Here's what you got to convince first yourself and then your investors. Is it plausible? Can this work? Has it been done before? Or if it hasn't been done before, did you build the case that this will work? You've thought it all through, your channel, your pricing, your positioning, the solution itself, your partners, right? All that sinks in the jigsaw puzzle. Credible. You have the resources to do it. And if you don't, one of the questions in your venture meetings is going to be, well, who are your next hires? Well, okay, it's fine if you don't have the right person, but number one on the next hire, once you give us money, is going to be the person or two that you need to pull this off. Is it consistent? I've probably beaten that horse to death, so I won't repeat it again, but you know what I'm talking about. And most of all, is it compelling? Right? Is your team excited to go execute it? Are the investors saying that's cool? And this is kind of the biggest caveat I'll place on the last 90 minutes. If you're really new and different, right? If you are just mind-blowingly, oh my God, we've never seen anything like this before, you can throw 90% of what I just told you out the door because no one knows what the business model is going to be. Okay, but own that, be honest about it. Twitter had no idea what the business model was going to be. Google was funded on a completely wrong business model. It's not where they wound up. Worked out okay. Don't be afraid to own this, but recognize this is the riskiest kind of investment, but it also has the biggest payoff. And you can't just go say, well, mine's so new, I don't have to explain this stuff, because if all you're doing is selling more software to IT VPs, then it's not new and you were just lazy. And metrics matter, right? If you fall off the growth curve, you got to understand that VC investments are contracts that are based on milestones, not dates. They are giving you enough money to get to whatever revenue threshold you agreed to. And if you're not going to make that revenue threshold, it's your responsibility preemptively to cut your expenses so that your money is going to keep you engaged until you reach that milestone. And the simple way to do that is the rule of 40, right? Okay, your growth is only going to be 50%, not 100%. You better be down at, you better cut your burn from 100% to negative 10% before your board tells you to or asks you to. Because the green line is success and the red line can be success. You can be hopeful if you're living by that rule of 40, but if you ignore it, now you're just the walking dead. And your investors are going to the partners meeting, someone's asking about your company and saying, oh, they're dead to us, next. Right? They'll drop off your board, they won't give you any more money, and they won't take your phone calls. Not that Eric and I have any experience with any of that. And so that's the end of me for the day. Probably seconds ahead of Cameron giving me the hook. Eric, you want to take 2 minutes and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, sorry I was a little late, but looking at the deck, it looked like hopefully it was of value to all. It's always great to see a lot of this information distilled. I've been in an operating role, done 3 startups. Most recently, Steve and I worked together on a big data play for behavioral health, namely AL, which was a SaaS platform focused on serving both providers and health plans. So my career has evolved from focused originally in the medical device area to more recently software as a service. And I think there's a lot of really good distillation of what Steve's articulated on just kind of what are the critical success factors. And at least from the digital health realm, which is my recent experience, Al, which we sold to a larger healthcare software company, Neuroflow, basically springtime of this past year. And it was, I think, the right case for us in that our growth rate was one where we knew we were going to be better served being in a larger software company as opposed to going out to the capital markets, which have become very, very stingy in the digital health space over the last 2 years. But anyway, here
Eric,
to answer questions.
Let's talk about your origin story for a minute, or at least part
About
of
what-
the
about-
origin story that I'm interested in. So among these 4 companies, how much ballpark, how much revenue how much venture capital have you raised in aggregate?
About 200.
Okay, $200 million is a substantial number. So Eric knows what he's talking about. Pick any company, I don't care. Walk this group through the process of raising the first institutional round. How long did it take? How many meetings?
It's evolved. I think the bar has gotten much higher. You know, if you go back to my first start at Calypso, which is a novel medical device technology, which largely become the standard of care for prostate cancer treatment for radiation, when radiation therapy is provided. That was what I call a DWI, which is a doctor with an idea. There was some intellectual property, large market, and the investment climate ebbs and flows. So if it's a hot market, you know, and it's good intellectual property and a compelling idea, they'll move quickly. When you get to markets like they are today, a couple of things have transpired, evolved over the last decade. A Series A threshold is much higher than it was back a decade ago, which means you need more proof positive, whether it's reference accounts, demonstrated product market fit, or clarity on the ICP. That's where the software realm exists. So now it can take upwards of, depending on what cycle, what your offering is and where the cycle is, it can take 6 to 12 months. So as my accounting professor told me in business school, the answer is actually, it depends. Things somewhat within your control, but many things outside of your control. So you've just got to constantly be looking at, how do I maintain, in the early stages, oxygen to be able to show progress, even if it's not the pace you would like. It's you will, at least in the healthcare world I came from, you will not typically be penalized, and or the concept of missing out on a market opportunity doesn't really exist in the healthcare market, at least in the B2B realm. The B2C realm for healthcare, I think, is an extremely difficult scenario I've consciously avoided, just because it's extremely fickle.
And how many, over 6 to 12 months, how many different institutions would you expect to meet with or communicate?
You should, yeah, I mean, I think at least 50. And at Calypso, I think we had a very good raise to basically get us through the FDA. This is for a medical device, and we spoke to 86. So I think you just need to recognize these are marathons, and you know, just keep your wits about you, that don't get too affected either way. I mean, I think the concept of momentum investing is, at least in the B2B realm, really doesn't exist, even if you think you're a fast follower, and then be able to make sure your business maintains progress. Maybe you compartmentalize your activities so others on the operating side continue to make progress, and then you treat fundraising as, if not a full-time job, pretty darn close. And then, you know, it doesn't mean as new. The other thing I'd highlight is, you know, if you can bring fresh news, it gives confidence to the investors that you're running a company that's continuing to progress, even while the amount of money you have, or what I call oxygen, is still very, very modest.
So let me ask you a question, and we'll flip over to Nils for a moment while you think about it, and then we'll open to AMA. But if you could tell your younger, you know, entrepreneurial self, 3, 4, 5 things, or this just group of aspirational entrepreneurs on the phone, what are the top, you know, early stage SaaS, going to market, going for capital? What are the 3 best lessons you could share?
overhire, number one. So you've got to be very effective in overhiring talent that's not only going to get you to where you are right now, but be able to not have to change out the team, for a reasonable amount of period. Number two, I would say is leverage your team. I think there's a mindset sometimes that we feel we must do it all and not show any weakness. And it's I learned a lesson on that when the FDA threw the book at us and we got through it. Or is if you can build a culture of trust, then you can leverage your team. Number three is be maniacal on understanding your product market fit, and don't get enamored with early adopters that are so early they're willing to experiment, but really understand how to get good product market fit. So as Steve often challenged me is, when does the flywheel effect kick in? I think in healthcare it's a little different from other segments, but understand that. But there's a whole other laundry list. But I think it's and everyone says, the old mantra a decade ago was raise as much money as you can. What I had a board member say when they're passing P's, take P's. But I think that mindset's changed, especially in the software realm, where the exits are not always as high as you'd like them to be. So your preferences, your waterfall model, your paid in capital needs to be very modest. So be very, very diligent on some of the metrics that Steve's teed up.
Great. Nils, anything to add to
I'll
either of
stop
them?
there.
Either of those questions?
I don't have anything to add. I'm
All right. So I think we lost Cameron. I think he had to run for
yeah.
another.
So I have been nominated to be the moderator for questions. So I
Okay.
just posted.
All right.
If you have a question, any attendee, you can either share it in the chat, or you can raise your hand using the Zoom React button, or you can just speak up. There's not that many of us. Oh, Cameron's back too.
Okay. And I realize I kind of threw the book at you today. So if everybody's just kind of sitting there open mouth going, oh my God, what do we do with all this? I understand that too, but we'll give it a minute here for any other questions. Cameron, you got anything you want to ask, or you all good?
No, I think the conversation's been solid between you all here, and yeah, really, really solid content. So nothing to add for me.
I would love to know the top 5 mistakes you see early SaaS companies make.
Let's see. I'll give you a couple. As I didn't warn everybody today, I remember warning everybody on Thursday. Different experiences have different people have different experiences. Eric just told you to overhire. I would say one of the issues I see is going too far in that direction. Right, there is a balance. You must have people you can trust. You must people who can challenge you. You must have people who you can leverage. But don't necessarily hire people because you think you have to fill the box with that set of credentials. I'd be cautious there. And then the second I would add, and then Eric and Nils jump in, is what I emphasized a couple of times today. Watch your revenue and watch your growth rate and your burn. And if they're getting out of whack, it is never too early to cut your burn. Okay, because you will find yourself 30 days from being out of cash, 40 days from being out of cash, and the investor's going, not us. And then you're really in a pickle. Nils, worst venture mistakes?
Well, I think that the thing to remember is that many of these companies fail before we even know that they exist, right? And that often has to do with not finding a product or a problem that's worth solving, building something before you have found a problem that's worth solving. So there's a lot of product market fit issues, and it can go all the way to the point where we never hear of the company, even, right? It doesn't get to the point of them even being ready to go into institutional investors or even lower level investors. So
Eric, what
don't do that. Basically, if you want to have a chance, you have to have a problem. You have to be solving a problem that people care about. Otherwise, you're not going to get very far at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two other points is, you know, you may start out in one market and need to evolve because the market evolves or the business opportunity back to your growth expectations. You know, we started a company when it was in a ditch, but it was doing $500 transactions. By the time we sold it, we were doing six-figure transactions, which required product evolution, you know, market segment evolution, and then obviously ICP evolution. So I think you need to constantly be vigilant on that. And it's a careful balance of knowing when that needs to evolve. I think the second thing that, Steve, you kind of hammered on this was making sure you're not trying to solve too many problems. I think if it's a good, big, hairy problem, you'll get rewarded for it without having trying to do a mediocre job on a bunch.
Yeah, and I'll add one, which I don't want to end on a downer, so I want to frame this as not a downer, even though it might sound that way. I mentioned it a few slides ago. Stubbornness is a virtue in an entrepreneur, right? Kick down walls, you know, put your head through windows, do whatever. But at some point, you got to ask the question in the mirror, is this working? And I'm working with a young lady right now, super smart, super determined. You know, I would bet on her to succeed at practically anything, you know, right mix of skills. And she's been at it for 14 months. She's signed up one customer. She's gone through all of her savings and she can't get funds. She can't raise money and she can't sign up more customers. Okay. She needs a compelling reason to keep going. And I don't see one for her. And this is where I think many founders, and I said this in the very first slide, in the very first deck of, you know, you got to be realistic, right? If it's not a great idea, if it's not a fundable idea, tell Cameron, okay, I'm stopping this one and I'm going to think about another one, and save 2 or 3 or 4 years of your life. Right? It's not a plea to, you know, when the tough get going, you know, when the going gets tough, the tough quit. No, that's not what it is. But the realistic say, okay, you know what, this one isn't what I thought it was, and it's time to go.
Interesting that you say that because we just did such a pivot. It was like I was down at EarthX and talking to investors, and they kept saying, you know, what's your API about? And I'm telling them we're a marketplace and it has the API built in, etc. We got a patent on it. And they kept saying, why don't you start with the API licensing? And it's like, oh, you know, to your point, you know, well, you know, and when we figured it out, we said it's quicker to market, brings money in faster than a marketplace does. So totally pivoting on that. And it's not like the marketplace is going to go away because this algorithm runs through the marketplace and whatnot, but it's just like a perfect example of being so focused on it's a marketplace and and then all of a sudden getting on enough drips of water to go, huh.
Lift your eyes up to the horizon sometimes, not all.
And what's really weird is I don't come with any technical background. Zero. And so it's like, okay, we're jumping into a new pond here. And luckily I have a couple of people around me who've got that background, but it's just, you know, it's taking that leap off of, I thought it was this to start with. Now it's going to be this.
Okay. Nils, if we got nothing else, then I think we're done for the day. Thanks for everybody for hanging in a few minutes longer than usual.
There was one question about differences between hard tech development and manufacturing versus SaaS.
Oh, well, since we got 2 hours left.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, what's not different?
Yeah,
and
and he's still here.
I would start framing that question as it's the difference between businesses that work with molecules versus the difference that businesses that work with electrons. And it starts with your cost of goods. It ripples all the way through your income and expense model, your balance sheet. Software companies these days should have no assets. The balance sheet should be effectively zero. Anything that's got molecules, you're going to have a balance sheet. And then you've got, it adds in logistics, which fundamentally software companies don't have. Go to market is going to be not entirely dissimilar. You still have to deal with pricing. You still have to deal with channels. You still have to deal with marketing and customer acquisition. But that would be a whole another series of webinars from someone who's got a totally different set of experiences than what I've got.
I think I was wondering if there were different measures that you would focus on. Like that's where I came in, was you were explaining the different measures for the SAS.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have?
Revenue growth is always going to be critical. You can take any segment of the public markets and run a price to revenue growth regression and get an R squared in the 0.8 to 0.9 range. I don't know what it happens to be for manufacturing. But then the other thing that you have to pay attention to in anything with hard goods is going to be EBITDA. So once you got down below the OPINC line down to EBITDA, and then I think market share.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I thank you so much. It's been so informative. Just wanted to find out, it's my first webinar here. Just wanted to find out whether I could access the previous ones.
Yes.
This has been so helpful.
Yeah, so I think that'll be a good way to close out our session here. So I will be following up with the links to the prior recordings, as well as I can share the additional slides. So that will come in a follow-up email as soon as I get it uploaded to YouTube, as well as access the PDF slides to send to you. So keep an eye out for an email from that. And other than that, want to say thanks,
Thank you
Steve,
so much.
Eric, and Nils for spending the time with us and sharing your experience and expertise. So we will see you all on Thursday.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you all.
All righty.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.